afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Caribbean Women for Climate Justice Conference. I am Durval Bazi of the Climate Conscious, and together with Christine Samwaru of the Breadfruit Collective, and supported by Open Society Foundations, we have partnered to host the inaugural Caribbean Women for Climate Justice Conference.
Hi, Deval. Happy Earth Day and happy Earth Day to everyone that's joining us for our second day. Really hope you learned something last night. It was definitely a night that I'm definitely going to remember, and I definitely have to go back and review my notes.
Yes, we started off with a bang yesterday with our first panel, which explored human rights and climate justice. And, it was such a great discussion. There was a lot of engagement in the chat, and there were so many highlights, so many takeaways. But one thing that stood out to me was the point that as a region, we have accepted an imported version or model of development, as opposed to coming up with our own that will fit our local context. And I think that, the conversations and discussions that we're having over the 4 days of this conference would really help us to rethink our model of development as we seek to become sustainable and resilient. So Christine, what about you? What stood out for you from yesterday's panel?
So much, I am so amazed. I said in terms of development, something that I keep thinking about is a comment that was made. We have to think about 7 generations down the line. And I really, Earth Day is a really special day on my calendar because I celebrate Earth Day every day in my work, in my life, in the Breadfruit Collective. But I think today is a special day because there is collective effort to celebrating Earth. And, I really feel special knowing that we have a community right here in the Caribbean and right here tonight, whereby we can come together and speak on this topic.
Yes, Earth Day is indeed very special for the reason you have mentioned in terms of bringing persons, those in the environmental field and those outside of the environmental field, to focus on the importance of protecting our planet. And it's also extra special because it marks the 2nd anniversary of the Climate Conscious podcast, which was launched on Earth Day in 2020. So we have a lot of reasons to celebrate today. And I'm really happy to be able to share today with all of you. So be sure to let us know where you are joining us from. We had a wide representation last night with persons throughout the region and even from outside of the region. So let us know in the chat where you are joining us from before we get into today's program. Are you excited, Christine?
I am so excited, and I'm going to encourage everyone in the chat to say happy podcast anniversary to Derval. It's 2 years, and this is her idea. So I'm so happy that we're all able to celebrate you in this way. And this is an idea that you have, and now it's materialized, and you invited me kindly to join you. So definitely, I'm so excited.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for the support of the Breadfruit Collective, Christine, Afifa, and Ayana, helping this vision to become a reality. And for everyone who has come on board and said yes to Caribbean Women for Climate Justice. So getting right into our program, I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker. And I know you all can't wait to hear her speak. So Ms. Ayesha Constable has paired her activism and her scholarship, having researched and published on gender and climate change as part of her doctoral studies, which links her interests in agriculture, climate adaptation, youth, and gender. Her research looks at perceptions of climate change and determinants of adaptation among small-scale farmers in rural Jamaica. The paper analyzes the intersection between socio-cultural and economic factors in shaping farmers' experiences with climate change and willingness to adapt. She is the founder of GirlsCare, a movement seeking to provide mentorship to young feminist activists in the Caribbean, and a recent recipient of funding from Rihanna's Clara Lionel Foundation to continue their work in feminist climate justice. Participants, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker for the inaugural Caribbean Women for Climate Justice, Ms. Ayesha Constable.
Good afternoon. Thank you so very much. It's such an honor to have been chosen for this massive role in this inaugural initiative, which brings together all the things I love and I'm interested in: women, the earth, the environment, climate, feminist perspectives, and all of that exciting stuff that links into that. We're all celebrating anniversaries today, it would appear. GirlsCare is also celebrating its second year, having been launched on Earth Day as well. We could not think of a better group to commemorate the day with. So thank you. And for us to be able to tap into this community and to this network that you're building, we consider it a great honor. I'll insert here that we are also working closely with Open Societies Foundation, or is also our contact. He probably would have my head if I were not to mention this, that we are also working on another aligned initiative, which is a climate justice youth coalition for the Caribbean, which would seek to center youth activity in climate justice in the region, and of course would be interlinked with everything else that we all are doing. And of course we want to explore all these synergies and capitalize on all the opportunities that can come from these partnerships and collaborations. So yes, my sincere thank you and kudos to the team. I'm going to share my screen at this moment, or attempt to. Is that my screen? Are you seeing my screen? No?
No.
Not as yet.
Right. Not quite yet, but it
okay.
can. Now we can, yes.
Okay. Okay, so again, trying my best to stick. I'm gonna watch the clock closely, because speaking to this is, it's like throwing candy to a child and they just sit down and want to fondle with it for hours. So I could literally sit and fondle with this topic for a long time. I will acknowledge the support that I'm receiving from members of the community of GirlsCare mentors and mentees. I see them in the chat. And it's an honor to be able to speak to the work that we're doing with you in this format as well. So themes I'll try to explore as connected with the themes that the conference is exploring: gender, climate justice, and feminist activism. And I would not have been able to do justice to these themes if I did not speak to my own journey in feminist activism and climate work. How did I get to this point, and why did it even matter that I looked at these issues or explored these issues as part of the work that I'm doing, not just academically, but on the more outreach, voluntary side, which to me is of even greater importance. Also looking to pull a few lessons from the Caribbean story. What significant periods in history were probably turning points, and what were the ways in which gender and climate change figured into those significant turning points in our history. GirlsCare, its emergence, what we do, and a few words about the way forward and how to bring all of what we're doing together, and of course possibly look to expand on the work that is being done by Climate Conscious, Femnet, and all the other groups that are in the space. All right, so my own journey, I would say, began before I was very aware of what I was getting into. And so having grown up in rural Jamaica, we talk about the country girl, and I know a lot of you are familiar with that expression, maybe not familiar with country life, but I grew up in rural Jamaica, and some would probably say deep rural Jamaica. And the observations I made at that time, very early on, but did not fully understand, were of the women and the work that they did. I shared some snippets of this in another conversation a couple of weeks ago. So if you heard that, bear with me. It is my story. At least I'm consistent, right? So, you know, observing women who were homemakers and farmers, who were the backbone of the community that we grew up in. And so I say rural women and their experiences, women who went to the market, or went to the farms rather, early every weekday of the, every week morning. So Mondays to Thursdays, they were on the farms before the sun rose. And they would, on Thursday evening, pack up their produce in the back of a truck and go to the market in Kingston. And then they would spend 2 days in the market and come back home on a Saturday evening, and they would go straight into preparing the home and, you know, tidying up for the weekend. And then Sunday morning, they would go early to church to tidy the church halls for church service that morning. And even then, as a young woman, it dawned on me that something wrong with this, because these were some of the hardest working women in the community, but they were the poorest women, right? And so the idea that the work that we do, that some of us do, is not commensurate with the remuneration that we make, is something that really bothered me. And I suppose that is the single most important takeaway from the system that we exist in, this capitalist regime on which, you know, the global world order and the global economics is grounded. And so that observation, like I said earlier on, it bothered me because it also was in some ways true of my parents, who were both teachers and worked very hard. You know, and I felt like as teachers, they had the most important job, but of course, we're not earning the best salaries. And so, of course, at the time, I wasn't calling it capitalism. I wasn't calling it exploitation. These were terms I, you know, later became familiar with. But again, I knew that something was off. And I wondered to myself too, even then, you know, what were these women doing in the markets on a Friday night and a Saturday night when they had their period? You know, how were they accessing sanitary facilities and you know, just maintaining that sense of dignity and integrity as a woman when you had to deal with this in spaces that did not provide that? And so again, it brings into you know, question the whole dynamics of sexual and reproductive health as well, you know, and the gender dimensions of that. A man will jump off the truck and go pee in the bush, you know. So what we're asking then, what accommodations are being made for women in those circumstances? And the reality and the truth in those circumstances, there were none. And again, in that period growing up, my own experience as a young woman coming into puberty and recognizing the changes in my own body, the changes in, you know, my own physical appearance, and the changes in the men around me and their interactions with me. And I felt very conscious of who I was now becoming. And I think that awareness is also true of a lot of young women, a lot of women, and it shapes again our perspectives of ourselves, or perspectives of the world around us, and how we interact with it. And similarly at that time, my whole experience as a country girl, you know, the fun and the excitement of growing up in country was linked to the natural environment. You go to the river, you climb a tree, you slide off a hill on a coconut bough, you know, you go to Guinea bush when it's Guinea season, you go to apple bush. But though all those things were definitive experiences of my growing up and tied into nature, but also it meant that when nature was working against us, so to speak, as in the case of, you know, rainfall events or hurricane, it also affected how we were able to operate. Right, also affected what we could do and what we could do for recreation or otherwise, or even just or sense of safety as a result of maybe disaster risks. So those early observations, again, were not grounded in any you know, theory or any nuanced understanding of the scientific issues and jargons around it, but I knew that these were things that I wanted to understand. And so when I went into high school, and I go to the class on PowerPoint, and when I went into high school in Kingston, issues related to class and power became more apparent, because then I was reminded of the fact, or made aware of the fact, that I'm poor. Prior to going to Kingston, you know, you feel like you live the best life as a country girl, everything free, fruits, water, everything. You go into Kingston where the dynamics are different, which is a capital city, and you realize that there are people who have access, you know, to power, to resources that you did not have. I also became conscious of the issue of color, race, and class, and where I sat and where my family sat in that hierarchy of these issues. So again, mind being reopened and made more aware of all of these things that are interplaying and defining my experience as a young woman. Following that, I went on to the UWI. There were some other experiences in between, but the UWI experience to me was important. And this was particularly so for grad studies period when I served as a resident advisor on Mary C. Cole Hall. And Mary C. Cole Hall, as some of you will know, is the Hall of Women. So it's an all-female hall of residence at the UWI. And there I had the responsibility for developing leadership programs for young women on the hall. And one initiative in particular that we led was what is now called the I'm Glad I'm a Girl initiative. And I remember one year we had a group of young women come in for that training. And one of the questions that we asked them was, are you happy to be a girl? And I remember we got a resounding no. They were all bothered by the fact that they were girl because it meant that their parents didn't trust them. It meant that men were harassing them. It meant that they did not have the same life chances as young men. And I think that experience, Mary C. Cole Hall, that particular moment is when I had that epiphany that this is where I want to serve. I want to work with young women in this way. And Nadine Spence, Dr. Nadine Spence, I put her name there because she introduced me to mentorship, the power of mentorship, the way in which mentorship transforms you and the way you think and the way you see the world with the right mentor, of course. And I wanted to I knew I would want to replicate that in the lives of young women wherever I served, but more pointedly, by creating opportunities for streamlined programs for mentorship. Thereafter, they comes into academia and advocacy as I have it here because I started climate research as a graduate student. And I remember climate then being this new and emerging topic and everybody spoke about it as a scientific issue. But again, my early experiences and my affinity for the humanities meant that I wanted to explore it in another way. And the interest, what was then, this confirmed interest in gender issues and women's issues, I needed to be able to marry the two. And of course, I sought to do that and integrate it into my studies. I remember trying desperately to explain the issues, the intersection of the issues to my supervisor at the time, and he couldn't get it, but I don't blame him. There's still men who choose not to get it. But what that experience affirmed for me was that there is a way certainly to integrate and to connect the things that you're passionate about and passionate about pursuing. And if you can convince yourself and do the necessary work to make that connection, then by all means. And the only way that I could enjoy academia was to be able to integrate that idea of serving and helping women as a part of this work. And of course, that is where I am today because of that commitment. And thereafter, just coming down to this stage, really building on all of these lessons learned and making those connections very significantly, pointedly, and recognizing that my area of service would be in climate justice and gender justice. And I remember a couple years ago when I discovered the statement by Terry, I'm forgetting her surname, that there's no climate justice without gender justice. And that has been my mantra for a little while. And so, the recognition of what I think I can contribute to this space, of the ideals that I espouse and where I see myself, meant that I wanted then to create movements and to become a leader in this space. And certainly not just for what it would do for me, but more so for the communities and the young women whose lives I think I can impact with that work. I'm trying to skip slides. Let me see. Okay, and these are just pictures from all of the various spaces I've interacted. But I wanted to point to the fact that when I got involved at this level of youth activism as a young woman in climate, that was where the issue of the global dynamics was most significantly displayed. So this idea that there are countries in the world that benefit from the exploitation and the subordination of other countries and wanting to maintain that world order was very, very evident. I remember one of the COPs, a small island out in the Pacific, as a part of the AOSIS agreement, they had said that all the countries, this was at the time when the 1.5 demand, 1.5 ask was very, countries were adamant about it. That was a thing. And I remember one prime minister from one of those small islands in the Pacific stepped away from that commitment with the rest of the islands because a certain US president had made a promise, right? And for me, that was mind-blowing. I think everybody has understood that this is how it works. But I was on the assumption that this whole idea of human rights and equity and inclusiveness and, you know, all these good things that we speak about were understood and countries would be, you know, gravitating towards that. But no, there are other forces and other factors at play which determine what the final outcome is. And I was also at the COP and yesterday we had this conversation about human rights, where human rights and gender were terms that they would not allow in the convention, in the final article of the convention. And again, just recognizing how far we've come, because things have shifted, but recognizing that, again, there are powers at be that do not support the agenda that global South countries are asking for. And so, you know, it says again that this work that we're doing, talking and creating these movements, is very, very important, because there are other forces that are pushing back equally as hard. And so you cannot, you know, for whatever reason, let down your guard or fail to push back in a meaningful way. And so my story and my journey, I think of it also in light of another journey and another story, which is that of the Caribbean, and the ways in which these significant periods, again, were turning points in gender issues and climate issues. And I don't know that there's any way in which we can talk climate vulnerability in the Caribbean and not speak to colonialism and slavery. And that whole period, those 2 decades or so, that transformed Caribbean physical landscapes, social landscape, and political landscapes, and some would say for the worse in some ways. You know, so when we talk about colonialism, we talk about the 1930s and the labor riots and the rise of labor unions and the role that women played, again, in both those eras. In the 1970s to 80s, we had structural adjustment policies and programs rather coming into stream, and or developing nation leaders at the time being coerced into making commitments to economic programs and plans that were not in the best interest of their nationals, but serving the more developed countries who had their own agenda. And again, in the 2000s, 2008, thereabouts, when we had economic recession, we had natural disasters, again, you know, changing the landscape, the physical landscape of many of our islands. And then I don't think, even though we have not yet fully defined the COVID period, we cannot speak to turning points without speaking to COVID and what it means, even though we have not yet seen the full implications of COVID impacts. But these for me are some of the main periods. And I'll just quickly speak to colonialism here, which the IPCC recognized in the latest publication, the AR6, as being one of the frontline or one of the primary issues that is a driver for the climate crisis. And that was the first that it was being included in the report. This is after many years of activists from across the global South speaking to this. And one of the benefits that we have as GirlsCare is that we connect with so many activists from the global South. And so we have spoken and built, you know, alliances with women in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific Islands. And in all of those conversations, colonialism has come to the fore. So I think IPCC is quite late in making this declaration. It's something that feminist activists have recognized and named, but of course, it augurs well for us to have it, you know, documented in the report. And when we made that linkage to the physical vulnerability to climate change, and we have to talk about monoculture agriculture and what it meant for the degradation of our lands and the exhaustion of certain minerals and nutrients from the land, because we had fields and fields of sugarcane, as we know, and our lands continue to, you know, try and bounce back. We've had all these programs where we're trying to transform sugar lands into other things because these lands are now depleted. Pollution because of all the pesticides and chemicals used in the growing of this crop. And at the same time, recognizing too that there is an analogy to be made for the ways in which our lands and commodities were treated and the ways in which women have been treated over the years. And I think it was one of our speakers a couple of weeks ago, Mahendra Rodriguez Acha, who made that connection and called it, you know, and made the connection between the use of the term rape and, you know, the way in which women are raped and the way in which our lands were raped. And again, in this period, women figured prominently in the maintaining of, you know, stable societies, as stable as they could be, as well as in the transition from slavery and plantation economy into the post colonial era and continue to shape that process. But in all cases, women maintained a very low position in the labor hierarchies. And that, of course, continues to today. Okay, and then we look at structural adjustment. I skipped the 1930s because I thought this was probably more important in the context of what we're discussing. And we see the cartoons here that talk about, you know, encouraging developing countries to throw their baggage overboard so they don't sink. And the claiming of the land and structural adjustment policies as a promise for economic growth. And the history tells us, the resources point to the fact that structural adjustment and this period has left our countries in the situation that they now are economically. Just about all the countries of the developing South that signed on to these programs continue to be in debt, continue to have labor issues, continue to you know, have some levels of political instability as a result. And what the history also tells us is the ways in which women were exploited and significantly disadvantaged because of structural adjustment programs. Women were amongst those who were more likely to lose their jobs, who were most likely to use incomes, and who were most likely to be excluded from the opportunities, from the so-called opportunities that came with structural adjustment. So, you know, the subsidies on food that were thrown out would have affected households that were larger and headed by women. The discontinuation of labor programs and migration programs, that women were primarily the ones who were capitalizing on. All of these things were as a result of structural adjustment. And we also see where some extractive industries expanded in the developing South during this period. Bauxite, for example, in Jamaica. And again, making that connection between our now climate vulnerability as a result of this. So, you know, the degradation of our natural resources, the increased exposure that our islands now face to some of the impacts of climate change were as a result of these programs. Okay, right, and COVID-19 as a turning point. COVID-19 often called a dress rehearsal for climate change. We see the high levels of vulnerability of women, or high levels of loss rather, experienced by women as a result of COVID-19. Because women occupied those spaces and occupations, in some instances, for example, among essential workers or domestic workers, that were most significantly impacted. We saw also the role that inequality and you know, what we call it, gender norms or gender stereotypes played in shaping the outcomes of COVID-19. And so, so one of the reports that was published around this time suggested that we are pushed back 40 years in achieving gender parity because of COVID-19. And this was after an initial report said it was another 100 years before we achieved parity. So now we're at a grand total of 140 years to achieving gender parity. So when people tell you that women reach, you know, and the fight is over and you can't stop push, no, remind them that we are 140 years from gender parity. And also in terms of economics and job situation, women, 54% of those who lost jobs due to COVID-19 were women. And we don't even want to get into the issue of the burden of care and all the other things that came with COVID-19, you know, as increased pressures on women. But more importantly, the same inequality, the same gender biases that exposed women to the, you know, sabotage and disadvantage in COVID-19 are the same issues that are going to put us at risk when we talk to climate. And so COVID-19, and why we talk about it as a dress rehearsal, we're saying if we don't get this right, then we're going to get climate change really wrong. Right, and the challenges there are supposed to be more long-lived and sustained. And so GirlsCare is an emergence of my or an output of my work, of my own upbringing, my early experiences, and this, you know, consciousness of the world in which we live. And so I recognized that there was a place, or there needed to be a place, where conversations about all of these things that are happening globally are had, a space where you're not judged for having what people might consider to be conspiracy theories about the structure of the world that we live in. And it is no conspiracy, right? I remember at one of those same events, the COP, I was told by a delegate from my own country that I was too radical. And I spent a couple years trying to come to terms with that and trying to de-radicalize myself until I realized that no, you just know woke. You know, this idea of coming into your own understanding of what these massive intersecting issues are that shape our world means that you're conscious of the world in which you live and the realities of this world. And I believe that this community of women that operate in this space are of that mind, and that is what will set us apart from those who come to this space as a, you know, oh, we just need to make 2 changes in the convention, or we just need to put another policy in place. We have to consider the issues that are at the root of the problem that we're facing, the structural and systemic issues that shape our reality. And GirlsCare, like I said, was supposed to be, is created with that intention in mind, where we speak openly and proudly to our feminist approach, the feminist approach of equality in our politics, you know, a space where we say we're unashamedly advocating for the rights of everybody, we're unashamedly advocating for the rights of the environment and the land that we call home. And so we have these amazing women, mentors and mentees. Our mentors are young women from across the Caribbean who serve in different capacities and have, you know, volunteered their time to serve these mentors. We have 25 of them this year. And the idea is that we're having these conversations and building community and, you know, openly challenging some of these issues that continue to shape our reality as women and continue to shape the extent of the crisis in the Caribbean. And so, you know, just trying to tie it back to gender justice and climate change, addressing the gender inequality in the Caribbean, addressing as well the role of women in our Caribbean societies and the spaces that women occupy. And these are things that I suppose by now we're all very familiar with. But the question is, despite the familiarity that we supposedly have with these issues, how many of us are, you know, intentionally taking this into consideration when we plan programs, when we plan engagements? You can't plan, you can't work in climate justice and you can't work in gender justice and dismiss the issues of those who do not have the platforms and the privileges to be in this space. I always say when I sit on a Zoom or in any space, you know, when we have 65 of us in a room, we are but a tiny percentage of the population that we try to work for and serve. And we are the privileged ones who have internet connection and are able to sit here and have this conversation, right? So we must bring their stories into the room and we must speak very loudly and you know, objectively, I suppose, about the ways in which their experiences are nuanced and different and need to be considered. You know, poverty, the structure of our Caribbeans, the composition in terms of races of our Caribbean people and where these races sit, the opportunities that, you know, are accessible to different groups and why the history of the Caribbean societies, as I earlier outlined. The feminist activists in climate justice and recognizing the danger of a single story, as I call it, recognizing that in each of our experiences, it does not, we do not again speak for the multitude of women who occupy the spaces that we operate in or occupy the more vulnerable segments of the Caribbean population. And so we cannot tell our story like it is the story. It is but one story, and we have to speak, you know, openly about the ways in which other communities that we serve are experiencing the issues that we're speaking to. Intersectionality, I'm glad that women are, you know, feminist activists are being able to bring this to the stage, and you see a lot more organizations slanderizing the term. I would say now everybody talking about intersectionality. I believe one of our speakers recently said that too. And when you see government entities talking about intersectionality, just to check it off, you have to question what is happening. The systemic changes that need to happen, where young women sit in the Caribbean in terms of the youth demographic, why, you know, we need to challenge these things, why and how to break the bias, and the ways again in which young women are leading adaptation and leading climate action locally, you know, and speaking to the experiences of indigenous groups, of LGBT groups, of persons with disabilities, all those groups. And I want to make the point here that young women are the face of climate action in the Caribbean. And I pause and ask myself why. And one of the things I come away with is that this idea of, you know, machoism and this idea of wealth and you know, earning power that men associate with is not found in this space. Like none of we are rich yet. You know, and there's a lot of unpaid work that goes into this, and a lot of the young women, a lot of the young men I know at least, are not going to see this as an opportunity for the kind of growth that they are in pursuit of. And so we see a lot of young women coming to the fore in these spaces. And my own research pointed to the fact that women are more concerned about climate change because that supposed maternal instinct. Women want to know that they're leaving behind a safe space for their children to inherit, right? And so I salute the young women who occupy this space, but I also see your struggle. And I'm also one of the loudest voices saying, pay young women for this work, because it is work, and it's important work that is going to go a long way in safeguarding the earth. At the very back end of the presentation, I'm going to wrap up in 5 minutes, or at least try to, with some of the things that we're trying to pursue, a feminist future, you know, and we ask ourselves, what will that look like? No patriarchal violence, equity to access and decision-making, Black women, girls, and gender expansive folk are safe and free. And when we think about that, it sounds maybe utopic, but it's an ideal that we need to be in pursuit of nonetheless, because the other side of that reality is too damning. System change, and we talk about that as well. You know, how do we change systems from the inside out, and how do we pursue a change, not just in individual processes or individual institutions, but a global or an overarching change in our systems to make the processes free and fair and accessible, to prioritize people and communities most affected by climate change, to contextualize the issues and problems to arrive at practical solutions. So we must take into consideration even the nuances in the experiences between our different countries in the Caribbean, and how do we create solutions that are in response and tailored to those specific issues that the countries are facing, and move away from this one-size-fits-all approach, which I believe is what structural adjustment programs were about to begin with. Apply a Black feminist lens to climate change, and I will always advocate for a Black feminist lens. And why do we say this? Because systematically and systemically, Black women and Black feminists have been excluded from decision-making and have been excluded from accessing the resources needed to do this work. They're also the ones who are on the front lines of the communities that are most vulnerable to climate change. And they're also the ones that are occupying physical spaces, the coastal areas, the most, you know, the places most likely to be inundated by sea surge, and the places most likely to be affected by drought. They occupy those spaces. And so giving them resources and giving them opportunities to do this work in a free, fair, and impartial way that allows us to challenge the system, to challenge predatory patriarchy and challenge capitalism is going to be what changes the system. We must also recognize that all of the different isms and schisms that are at play, how they intersect and how they interconnect, and what that means. It means that we have a bigger task on our hands. It means that the work is that much harder because there's so much more happening and going on and interplaying, and there's no single response that's going to fix this. But what it means then is that there's no single individual who has the solution for this, and all of us, as we know, gather and operate in this space, must come to the fore at all times ready to fight this. And so young women who are in this space and are continuing to do this work, I will say to you, continue to do this work, continue to speak up, continue to show up, but also politicize the issue of climate change, which is not politicized in the Caribbean. It's not politicized to the extent that we're going to make decisions about how we vote and who we vote for. And that needs to change. It needs to change because we need to highlight and acknowledge who are the countries or who are the leaders who are most likely going to demand access to climate finance? Who are the leaders that are going to ensure us a just transition as we phase out fossil fuels? Who are the leaders that are going to ensure a gender responsive approach to this work that we're doing? And on that basis, we make decisions about voting. But if we continue to treat it like the salient issue, valence issue rather, that, nobody is going to make a decision around, then they will continue to not consider this in the decisions that they're making and the policies that they're making. And when they put out these manifestos and just do a little one line about climate change, it will always be in the shadows of everything else. We need to challenge neo-colonialist ideas and this idea that there is this superpower waiting to save us, and this idea that young women in the global north are mouthpieces. They are not. We tell our own stories in our own words, have our own experiences, and are very much able to push and challenge those narratives on our own. Say no to gender washing and greenwashing, and be careful of the ways in which different entities come to us and, you know, quietly make these promises and assumptions because I think we don't know. We need to say we know, and we need to say we are very much on the page of the victors and the agents and the institutions and our own agency and our own ability to make those decisions and to call them out for the carpet sweeping and the underhanded approaches to the work in the Caribbean region. Collaborate, solidarity, all of this work that you're doing, Derval, all of this work that you're doing, Christina, all the other amazing young women on the call, it will go so much further if we find and create those opportunities to amplify it. And so, you know, I stand ready at any time and every time to work with all of you to find ways in which we can, you know, sync the work that we're doing and take it even further. The voices of young women in the global south continue to be drowned out by that of the voices in the north. And we must find ways and platforms and channels in which to tell our own stories, like I said, and make our own voices heard. And I will end by saying, take up space. Take up all the space you need. Say all the things you need to say. It doesn't always have to be right. It doesn't always have to be, you know, the most eloquent of speeches. It doesn't always have to be backed up by statistics. But your own story and your own expertise is grounded in the fact that you are a woman. We don't need nothing else. Being a woman, having these experiences that we have as women and authentically representing that wherever we go is our badge of and claim to any opportunity and claim to honor and fame and everything else. So I salute you and the work that you're doing. I am grateful to have this soapbox for a few minutes to speak, and I so look forward to everything else that comes from this conversation and from the work that we all are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ayesha, for that powerful presentation. You mentioned a question in your presentation about asking a group of girls, are they happy to be girls? And so I would pose that question to the audience. Are you happy to be a Caribbean woman? I'll pose that to the audience, and let's see in the chat. But definitely I have to thank you for taking us through your personal journey from your rural upbringing to now being, I would say, a global advocate for gender and climate justice. Thank you for highlighting some of the structural and systemic issues that need to change, and also for acknowledging our history of colonialism and slavery, which continue to affect us even up to today. You're right, none of us are rich yet, but we're rich in fulfillment, you know, by doing this work, and we definitely need to encourage others to get on board, our male allies to get on board. And of course, we're all committed to taking up space and also giving space and a voice to those in the global south, our vulnerable and our underserved populations. So thank you so much for setting the tone for the rest of the celebration. I know there's so much more that you can share with us, and I look forward to, you know, more opportunities for engagement and collaboration. So thank you, Ayesha. So I'll hand over now to Christine for the next part of today's session.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, what a keynote. Thank you. I think when we were planning this, you know, we were thinking we really needed somebody that really understand the issue of climate change, climate justice, and how it ties into gender. And I think we did I'm really proud of the choice, and I'm really proud of you, Ayesha. I'm proud to know you. And I'm also proud to be a part of GirlsCare as a mentor this year. So now I'm gonna ask you all to sit back, take a deep breath, and we're gonna have a poem by Nikhil Sankar. He is a 19-year-old student, activist who is pursuing a degree in medicine at the University of Guyana. He's a performer with passions in singing, poetry, and public speaking. Through his writing, he aims to tackle widespread social issues. He most notably performed a poem at the presidential inauguration in 2020 on love and unity. Thank you so much, Nikhil, for accepting our invitation hearing from you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Christine. And I must say, first of all, it is quite an honor to be in this space of powerful young activists. And as I was listening to Ms. Constable's electrifying presentation, and we were discussing gender justice, climate justice, it brought me back to something I had heard 2 years ago. Now, I don't know if you know of Mr. Joaquin Phoenix, the actor, but he had received his Oscar in 2020, and he spoke about something that I'll briefly mention before I go into this poem. We speak about various issues. We came here today, we're talking about gender justice, we're talking about climate justice, amongst other things. And I realized that whether it's climate justice, whether it's gender justice, whether it's fighting for the working class, whether it's queer rights, we're talking about the fight against injustice. We're fighting against the belief that one grouping of beings has the right to exploit another group with impunity, without even a modicum of accountability, and that has to change. And as we have learned over the years, a lot of these issues do intersect. So that serves the basis for the poem I've written today, for this function today. The poem was done 2 years ago, and I never got the chance to perform it, but here we are. So the poem is entitled People's Power. Let's begin. People's Power by Nikhil, Sankar. We stand tall, firm feet rooted in the ground, hands gripped tightly. This is the way. For what can we do in this beautiful land if there is a divide? For what can we do in this breadbasket of the Caribbean if there is hate, if brothers and sisters turn against each other? How can we build when there is malice? This poison that pits us together must be eradicated. For once the seeds of unity are sown and we nurture them, there is no way to grow but up. These blinding lights that glow within us help us to rise and soar together. Like soaring butterflies that emerge from their cocoons, we must all come out and fly together. We must not give in and turn into sharks and bite each other in a hunting ground. For this demon that's disunity will cackle and sharpen his claws. When there is the absence of love, we can't let him win. We warriors of love will show this demon of disunity that love and reconciliation are the greatest tools, the greatest to our advantage. For just like the great warriors of this earth, we are stronger together. We are smarter together. We must build together. This is the way. Our nation, with its beauty, possesses some of the most beautiful people of all backgrounds. Any malice, any hate that exists must go now. Release it from our bodies. It's a burden on our souls. All of us, we must walk these streets and fight the good fights, hand in hand, united and free. We must not be a broken nation. We must be never a divided nation, for then we will only be weak and nothing more. The healing must begin. But I know these warriors that we are, these beautiful, powerful spirits, will show that we as one people, we as one nation, we as one destiny, the greatest power can be achieved, the people's power. This power is ours, and it is time for us to heal. It is time for us to grow together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. It's really impactful poem. I really appreciate your voice and I really appreciate you being in this space with us. Thank you so much.